Aigou, the ancient capital of Macedonia. That night, the wind came from the north, not bearing snow or rain, but carrying the scent of ash, and a scream swallowed by marble columns. In the marble corridor, a goblet of wine lay tipped over the red spilling, like blood. Or perhaps it was blood. King Philip II had been assassinated. The one standing beside the throne did not cry. He was barely past 20, yet his eyes were already like the wind, untouchable, unshakable, unbroken. They called him Alexander, but that was the name of the living. From this night onward, he would walk into the realm of those consumed by fate, or strong enough to consume it in return. While others ran to chase the assassin, he simply walked toward the throne, where the flickering torchlight fell upon the statue of Athena staring down. No words, no tears. He placed his hand upon his father's sword and whispered, "If the gods have chosen me, then let me choose the gods." And thus Alexander did not ascend with a coronation, but with the absolute silence of all who once doubted him. From spilled blood, from wind-blown ash, from a murdered king, an empire not yet born had just awakened. That morning, the sun rose slower than usual, as if even nature held its breath before a name was spoken aloud, a name not meant for mortals. After the night of blood, Macedon woke in silence. Generals gathered, city-states murmured old enemies, watched. The throne stood empty in the hall, light no longer golden, but bone-white. Then the doors opened. No herald, no trumpets, no guards. Only one man, young, still walked in with steps that did not hesitate. No bowing, no sword drawn. He simply stood, and all of Macedon fell quiet. Alexander didn't need to shout. His voice carried like something rising from the earth itself, passing through the bones of men who once fought his father and now bowed before the sun. I don't ask for loyalty to me. I ask for loyalty to yourselves. If you still carry the fire my father lit within you. An older general rose about to object. Alexander met his eyes, not with anger nor threat, just the gaze of someone born not to live, but to burn. The general sat back down. No other dared rise. Seers were summoned. An elder trembled as he drew a circle in ash. Within it, he wrote two names, Alexander and Ammon, and lit a green flame. The ash lifted, and the name Ammon burned first. The old man collapsed, whispering, "The god has called him by his own name." From that day, he was no longer Prince Alexander. He became Alexander, the one named by Zeus Ammon. Beneath the shadow of Olympus, he he swore, "I will not be king of a place. I will not be king of a people. I will be king of the road that leads to the last light." No one fully understood, but they believed, for in his eyes was the one thing that made even those who once raised spears against his father bow their heads. Not power, but purpose. Not crown, but a fire that would not die. While others went to war with armies, Alexander began with a question, not to the living, but to the gods. He left Pella, quietly passed through Thessaly. No banners, no fanfare, only a small guard and a cart carrying King Philip's sword, never yet drawn in ceremony. Alexander said, "I won't draw it until the gods consent." Macedonians were once seen as outsiders to the Greeks. But when Alexander came to Delphi, the sacred heart of the land, even the statues seemed to turn their gaze toward him. There was no grand welcome, no golden gate, only wind and a marble road that led to the temple of Apollo. The Pythia, the oracle of Apollo, declared no omens that day. A dark day, no prophecy. Alexander wasn't angry. He simply stepped forward, and then again, until the Pythia cried out, "The gods have chosen you." It was no prophecy. It was surrender. After that day, none could deny Alexander wasn't merely heir to Macedonia. He was the final whisper of Apollo, leaving the old world. He went to Corinth, where the council of city-states once defied Philip. They awaited him with suspicion, with tests, with eyes still doubting. Alexander didn't argue. He stood before them, drew Philip's sword for the first time, and said, "This sword does not bring war. It is your fear that summons it. If I am war, then you are the reason it must exist." No one answered. An elder philosopher, once a friend of his father, stepped forward. He said, "You don't need that sword. You need Athena's eyes to know when not to use it." Alexander paused. He bowed. It was the first and rare moment he accepted a lesson. Then he handed the sword back to his attendant and said, "I have thunder in my hand. Now show me the goddess's gaze." That night, wind howled over Acrocorinth. Some say they saw Alexander alone, staring east toward the lands beneath Persia's shadow. His hand grasped the air. When asked what he saw, he simply said, "I see an empire no one dares name, but it is waiting, not for a king, but for one who knows that the gods do not love war, only those who would dare use war as the last act for peace." Not all empires begin with a city. Some begin with a river. And some battles divide more than just land, they divide history from legend. The Granicus River wasn't wide, but it ran swift. On one bank stood Alexander, not yet 23. Across from him, the first Persian army to raise its head under Darius's name. Between them, red water and blinding white sunlight. His generals pleaded, "Wait for cooler skies. Attack tomorrow. Don't spill blood in freezing water." Alexander said nothing. He watched the river. Then, when the sun reached its peak, he ordered, "Now for history always watches the one who moves first." He rode into the river. No shouting, no drums. Just a lone figure in burning bronze, lion-crested helm, cutting through the current like an arrow. Behind him, Macedonians did not wait for orders. They too stepped into the river, thirsting not for blood, but for recognition. If they were to die today, let it be before the world's gaze. The clash was brutal. Persian cavalry charged midstream. An axe nearly struck Alexander. It scraped his helm, splitting the bronze nose guard, but he did not fall. One bodyguard, Clytus, cut off the attacker's arm and pulled him to shore, where Macedonian lines were beginning to break through. The sun did not yield. Shadows of both sides blurred into dust and water. No one knew ally from foe. Only the cries of the living and the silence of those who fell into water, the color of spilled wine. By late sun, the battle ended. Alexander sang no victory hymn. He stood by the river, watching Persian bodies laid in neat rows, and said, "They did not flee. They died as soldiers. So let us bury them as men worthy of memory." He raised a stone stele bearing the names of generals on both sides. No distinction. Only this inscription: "Here is where history tested the blade and found that fire does not need wind to burn." And from that day forward, Granicus was no longer just a river. It became the border between mortals and myth. Not all victories require blood, and not all cities burned are defeats. Sometimes it is the ashes that linger longest in the world's memory. Halicarnassus, a white stone city by the shores of Korea, famous not only for its walls, but for once holding the mausoleum of Mausolus, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Alexander came not to conquer, but to measure the weight of will. Inside the city, Memnon, a Greek general in Persian service, had prepared everything: supplies, catapults, fire traps, mercenaries. He knew Alexander would come, but he didn't know Alexander came not to win, but to understand what makes a city deny the call of both gods and steel. The siege stretched long. The sun scorched. Waves battered. Soldiers on both sides wilted. Alexander did not rush. He ordered siege towers, cut off water, and tried to convince the people inside, "I do not need Halicarnassus if Halicarnassus does not need the future? No one surrendered. No gate opened. On the 33rd night, the wind turned. A stray fire arrow hit an oil stockpile. Flames spread into wooden walls, then into the homes. Alexander watched from afar, not with rage, but with the fire reflected in his eyes, like a falling star landing in a man's heart. He did not order the fire extinguished. He only said, "If this fire is the God's, then I shall not stop it. But if it is man's, then I will preserve only what is worthy of walking through flame." By morning, half the city had burned. Alexander entered, not with weapons, but with silence. What remained stone tombs, a few statues, and the steady gaze of the survivors. He didn't destroy the rest. He left a garrison, built schools, restored a library, and said, "A city does not need tall walls, but memories that do not fear fire." They asked, "Did you win?" He replied, "I do not need to win. I only need to be remembered rightly." And so, Halicarnassus became the first city Alexander did not conquer, but accepted, where fire not only consumed, but revealed. Not every gate has a key, and some gates only open when someone dares to break the rules. Phrygia, the ancient land of nameless kings, where a legend lay asleep in a withered rope over 2 centuries old. They called it the Gordian knot, a tangled cord tied to an old cart's yoke. And an ancient oracle had once said, "He who unravels this knot shall become king of all Asia." Alexander did not come to Gordium to solve riddles. He merely stopped seeking rest for a weary army. But when the people heard he had arrived, they led him to an old temple where light filtered down through a dusty dome. There, among silent statues, the knot sat waiting, like a question from fate left unanswered. Generals gathered. Scholars murmured, all expecting him to untangle it, carefully, reverently. Alexander stood still. He looked at the rope. He looked at the cart. Then he looked at his hand. Without warning, he drew his sword. One strike. The rope snapped. Wood dropped. Silence. Gasps followed. Some called it heresy. Others stared in awe. Alexander simply said, "It matters not whether I untied it by hand or by steel, only that the knot is gone." That night, some dreamed of Zeus appearing, placing a hand upon Alexander's head and whispering, "You did not break divine law. You merely dared to do what even gods feared." Word spread across Asia. Alexander had undone the Gordian knot, not with wit, but with a will that did not wait for fate to grant permission. A nampa had been cut. A gate had opened. And a king who did not wait to be chosen had chosen himself. Not all battles begin with the clash of swords. Some begin when two gazes meet and the world forgets to breathe. The field of Issus, caught between mountains and sea, was once a place of harvest of cool waters and passing birds, unaware that one day it would host two worlds, colliding like rival stars falling to the same earth. To the east, Darius III, King of Kings, came with thousands of chariots, tens of thousands of soldiers bearing not just swords, but the pride of dynasties. To the west, Alexander, with a smaller force, but every step they took carried a promise. We do not win by numbers, but by the truth that we have no road back. As the armies took formation, rain began to fall. Alexander did not cover his head. He turned to his men and said, "If my spear must be wet, let it be with the rain of history." Darius stood on his chariot, purple cloak flowing. Alexander saw him for the first time. No hate, no fear. Only the curiosity of one who sees what blocks his road and does not turn. The battle began while the sun still hung low. Persia struck at the flanks. Alexander drove straight into the center toward Darius. Spears shattered. Helms broke. Blood soaked soil. No one knew sky from earth. Only the rising breath of those trading life for immortality. Then through smoke and screams, Alexander charged straight toward the king's chariot. Darius saw him. Their eyes met like thunder, caught in silence. And Darius, the great monarch of one of history's grandest empires, turned and fled. No arrow followed. Alexander stopped. He did not pursue. He said, "I need not kill him today, for from this moment he is king no more." That night, Alexander entered Darius's tent. He saw the armor, the crown left behind the hastily abandoned throne, and a letter from Darius to his family. "If I do not return, know that I tried." Alexander placed the letter in his coat, looked to the sky, and whispered, "You tried, but I arrived." And history remembers not those who tried, but those who complete. From then on, Issus was no longer a field. It was the mark where Alexander stepped beyond being the Westerner and became the one who stood between Asia and Europe, and between fate itself. Not all victories happen on land. Some are born from the sea, where men pave paths using the impossible. Tyre, a proud island city, floating in the Mediterranean, like a queen who needed no throne, only water. No fortress dared stand taller. None had ever been taken, and none had ever imagined walking to it, until Alexander came. He sent envoys. No threat, no demand for tribute, only a request to enter the temple of Melkart, the Phoenician god he saw as Heracles' reflection to offer a sacrifice. Tyre refused. No insult, only a calm declaration. This is sea. This is island. This is not the land of mortals. Alexander was silent. He gazed across the water and said, "Then let me make this place land." None understood, until he ordered trees, cut stones hauled, and a causeway built from shore to island. Day by day, stone by stone. Waves rose, winds howled, enemy ships attacked, workers fell, blood spilled. But the path stretched on. Each meter laid was not just engineering, but a message to the gods. I do not ask permission, I build it. Tyre responded with arrows, fire warships. Alexander responded with utter silence and a will harder than stone. He built siege towers on the causeway, shielded with wet hides, firing back with burning oil. Day by day, the sea did not change. The wind did not shift. But man did not step back. 7th month. Tyre's walls cracked. A breach wide enough for Macedonian storm troops, and a night where the sea turned red, and even the moon failed to light the floating dead. Tyre fell. But Alexander forbade torching temples or slaying the surrendered. He entered Melkart's shrine, placed a laurel crown on the god's statue, and said, "I am not the destroyer of walls. I am the one who fulfilled the promise to set foot here with or without your leave." They asked, "Did you defeat the sea?" He smiled. "I did not defeat the sea. I made it carry me." From that day, Tyre was no longer an island. It became a lesson that even gods must yield when men lay down roads of will not soil. Not all cities are built with stone and mortar. Some are born from a thought and grown by the winds of the future. After Tyre, after victory in Egypt, Alexander did not seize the Nile. He merely walked along the coast where the sunrise met no walls. There, he stopped. Not for strategy, not for supplies, but for one reason. I want to build a city with no roof over people's heads. The generals did not understand. He stepped onto damp sand and with his spear traced an arc, then a line toward the sea, then squares, temples, libraries, all with lines thin as breath. Ptolemy asked, "What name shall you give this place?" Alexander did not turn. He only smiled. "Not a name. I give it, but a name it will give me." Thus Alexandria was born. No walls, no gates, no people, only intention. But that intention was strong enough that centuries dared not forget. No gods gave blessings. No holy rites began the work. Only the wind brushing lines in sand, and a young man staring at the sea, thinking of what must outlive him. He ordered the first library where every book in the world must be copied, not to own knowledge, but to send an invitation. Those who seek to understand the world, come here, not to believe, but to ask. Then he pointed offshore, where a reef jutted out. There build a lighthouse, not to guide armies, but to let light reach those who have never heard my name. That night, Alexander did not sleep in a tent. He lay on the sand amid the chalk lines, staring at stars. A guard asked, "What do you see, my king?" He answered, "I see a city with no roof because it fears no sky." And so, Alexandria became not a city of Greeks, but of all who did not believe that the world must be built of walls. Note all blood dries on the battlefield. Some seeps into silk, into unfulfilled promises, and into the heart of the victor. Susa, the winter capital of the Persian Empire, where everything was soft velvet, cushions, sweet wine, carpets, hand-woven by trembling fingers. The entire city felt like an invitation to surrender and to sleep. But Alexander did not come to rest. He came to reclaim what belonged not to men, but to memory. The people of Susa did not resist. They opened the gates, laid carpets, burned incense. Darius was gone, only shrines, treasure halls, and a sadness without a name remained. Alexander did not destroy, did not seize. He simply walked the grand hall where golden walls reflected a shadow that didn't belong to this world. Then he saw the crimson silk carpet leading from the throne to the door, and in the center, a stain of blood. Not large, not fresh, but loud in its silence. Clytus whispered, "Someone was killed here." Alexander knelt, gently touched the stain, and said, "This is not the blood of enemies. It is the blood of a promise broken." He stood, gave orders. "Remove the silk. Lock away the gold. I need nothing abandoned by the one I came to find." That night in the great hall, he held no feast. He reread Darius's letter from Issus. Then he wrote a single line by hand and placed it upon the altar of Ahura Mazda. "I have come not to conquer, but to end. If fate lets me touch this crown, then let me use it to stitch the last tear between two worlds." But the generals thought otherwise. In the shadows, whispers began. Alexander bows before Persian gods. He's forgetting his Greek blood. He means to rule even as a Persian king. He knew, he heard, but he did not correct. He merely looked into a bronze mirror and asked, "How many versions of me have been left behind on this road? Is there any Alexander still whole after so much blood? Or am I only a carpet woven from the voices of two shores. The next morning, he left Susa. No glory, no statue, only a small wooden box placed in the temple inside Darius's letter, Alexander's own line, and the dried stain of blood. Not all battles happen on the ground. Some are fought inside the heart before blood even touches the grass. Gaugamela, a plain where horse shadows stretch longer than men, where Alexander knew that every step taken today would tread on the bones of millennia. Before him stood Darius III for the last time, not in dreams, not in whispers, but in full wearing all his glory and all his fear. Persia brought over 200,000 troops, war elephants, chariots with blades, traps sewn across the plain. Alexander had fewer than 40,000, but each man carried not just a sword, but belief in one man and one only. He passed through the ranks wordless. Just a look, and Macedonian spears stiffened as if Zeus himself had walked past. Ptolemy whispered, "This is no longer a battle. This is the final trial between two visions of the world." Before the clash, Alexander looked at the sun, did not draw his sword, did not pray. He only murmured, "If I die today, let it be at the very center of fate. If I live, let the heavens know I chose this." The battle began in silence. Then the drum, then the hooves, then the sound of the world splitting open. Alexander feinted left, then surged right, piercing the weakness between Persian cavalry lines. Darius reeled, but this time he did not flee at once. He stood watching Alexander charge, and their eyes met like two blades without collision. A breath, a sigh. Darius retreated. For the last time, no one pursued. No one cheered. Alexander lowered his sword, said nothing. He knew the old man was no longer the enemy, but the silhouette of a world about to vanish. Night fell. Alexander held no feast. He walked the battlefield where corpses merged with earth. He did not count. He did not record, only whispered, "They died not for me, but because the world needed someone to go this far. And if I have won, then I must live for all who fell beneath my steps." The Battle of Gaugamela ended, not in blood, but in the silent acknowledgement of heaven and earth. One empire cracked, and another nameless, borderless, was born. Not every victory has someone left to receive it, and sometimes it is the defeated who leaves the echoing final word. After Gaugamela, Alexander did not stop. He pursued Darius, not out of hatred, but because closure requires a meeting. For weeks, the army crossed forests, mountains, deserts. The Persian wind burned their faces, but Alexander never rested. Each step felt like it pressed closer toward a meeting not of two men, but of two shadows of an era, until at one sunset deep in a silent valley, like an abandoned shrine, he found Darius lying there, no longer on a throne, no longer in armor, just a frail body wrapped in purple with eyes closed, as if still waiting for a question. The assassins had fled. They killed not for cause, but for power that needed no crown. Alexander dismounted. No rage, no cries, no fists against the sand. He simply knelt beside the man once called King of Kings and whispered, "We should have met not with blades, but with hands clasped as two who bore the weight of opposite skies." A soldier brought out a scroll hidden in Darius's robes. The final letter. The script trembled, but was clear. Just a few lines. "Alexander, if you find me gone, know I did not hate you. I simply did not know how to live beside you in the same dream. If anything of Persia remains, keep it not to conquer, but to remember. For memory is the one thing the gods cannot write alone." Alexander read it in silence. Then, removing his own cloak, he covered the body of Darius and ordered bury him as a king. "I did not take his life, and because of that, I owe him a share in immortality." No statue marked the grave, no carved victories. Only one line. He did not win, but he did not lose. For he lived long enough for his successor to learn that power is not to be kept, but to be given away one final time without force. As the army departed, Alexander looked back once and whispered, "From now on, there is no one left to defeat. Only myself." Every wedding is held for celebration. Some are held to stitch a tear between two dreams that never had time to meet. When Alexander reached Bactria, a land of highlands between snow and sand, he brought no decree of conquest, but a heart tired from too many victories. There he met Roxana, not on a battlefield, but in a blooming apricot garden. She stood still by a stream, dark hair falling over her shoulders, and did not bow when he approached. He reined in his horse, did not ask her name, did not command. He only said, "Are you not afraid of me?" Roxana met his eyes. "No. I've lost enough to know no one can take what's left. You are not the first to pass through my life, but perhaps the last to stop." Alexander said nothing more. He dismounted, stepped closer, and stood beside her, as if they were both survivors of dreams already shattered. A week later, he told his generals, "I will marry her, not for politics, not for alliance, but because I need a pause to know I am still human." The generals objected. Some scoffed. Ptolemy was silent. Hephaestion looked directly at him and said, "If you marry her, do it with your heart, not your crown, or she will become a memory you cannot erase." The wedding took place in a quiet garden. No drums, no music. Only jasmine falling in the breeze and a whisper from the earth. Two people from opposite sides of a fracture today touch as if two memories found their shape. Roxana wore no Greek gown. Alexander wore no crown. They shared water, not wine, and a kiss, not long, but long enough to stop time for a moment. That night, Alexander did not sleep. He sat alone on a rooftop, looking down at the garden. Not from doubt, but because, for the first time, victory was not in his hands, but in someone's eyes. He whispered, "If I have a child, I don't need him to be a king. Only to know his father once loved in the middle of conquest," and paused while the world still ran. No scribe recorded the ceremony. No chronicle detailed it. Only a legend remains that on one night, Bactria grew warmer because a wedding was held not for power, but because memory needed shelter. Not all lands belong on maps. Some cannot be drawn because they only appear when one becomes small enough to look up. After the wedding, Alexander moved eastward again, not to conquer, but as if he were drawn by a wordless call rising from unnamed mountains. It was the Hindu Kush, where stone cuts like blades. The sun is not golden, but white as salt, and people live like smoke between rocks present, but never held. The Macedonian army weakened. The wind was colder than any battlefield. Nights froze, even prayers, turning them to mist before they could reach the sky. One night, Ptolemy asked, "Where are we going?" Land without kings, people without laws. Why do you march into a place where even gods dare not dwell? Alexander didn't answer at once. He only stared toward a ridge where a man stood silently, bow in hand, unmoved. He said, "Because I've never seen anyone live without fear of something above them. I want to understand them before I ask them to understand me." So he did not conquer the mountain tribes. He sent bread, fire, and clean water, sent greetings, sent men to learn their tongue. An elder appeared before him, white beard, deep eyes, stone in hand. He asked, "Who are you to step into the land of fire and stone and think you'll leave behind anything longer than dust?" Alexander replied, "I did not come to leave anything. I came to remember and carry what stone never keeps memory." The elder smiled and nodded. he led Alexander to a high cave where flames burned all year with no firewood. He said, "This is the heart of the mountains, neither cold nor hot. It simply shines for those sincere enough to see." Alexander knelt, not in prayer. He placed his hand near the flame and closed his eyes. In that moment, he was not king, not conqueror, just a lost man seeking warmth in a place that promised nothing. Later, he ordered his army, no forts, no taxes. He left this land untouched, like a rest in the symphony of his journey. He said, "Some places do not need my name, only to know I once passed through without making them change." From then on, the northern tribes called him the guest who did not step on the soul of the stone. Not every battle needs a victor. Some are born just to show that certain souls share the same blood, though standing at the sky's two ends. After Hindu, Kush, Alexander stopped at a wide river, flooding relentless rain, the sky a heavy curtain, dripping divine tears. It was the Hydaspes, the last barrier before India unfurled like a foreign cosmos. And across the river stood Porus, king of Porava. No retreat, no envoys, only waiting atop an elephant gaze, sharp as a spear. Alexander asked Hephaestion, "Who is he to stand uncovered beneath the wrath of heaven?" Hephaestion replied, "Perhaps a man who does not believe nature can shrink him." Alexander smiled. "Then I must meet him, not to fight, but to be measured." The Macedonians crossed the river by night. Through flood thunder and sucking mud, they advanced not to claim land, but because for once, Alexander wanted to see if he could still outmatch himself. The battle began at dawn. Elephants roared, horses bucked. Neither side yielded, like two mirrors trying to see through one another. Alexander met Porus in the field, eyes, locked blades, crossed, but neither struck. Only a breath, a pause, and Alexander asked, "If you were me, how would you treat a defeated foe?" Porus replied, "As a king, not because he is one, but because he fought like one." Alexander laughed not in triumph, but in the joy of finding another who understood that the world doesn't need more allies, but doesn't lack enemies either. He didn't take Porus prisoner. He returned his kingdom and gifted more beside. Hephaestion was stunned. "What are you doing?" Alexander replied. "I don't need his land. I need him alive, so the world knows I did not conquer. All only touched souls that wanted to look forward together." That night, the two kings sat by the river. No politics, no gods, only shared childhood dreams and fathers now gone. And so Hydaspes was not a battle won, but a place where a friendship was born, needing no nation, to give it name. Not every conquest ends in defeat. Some end with a single word, no, from those who loved you enough to stop. After Hydaspes, Alexander looked eastward toward forests, untouched rivers, unnamed on Greek maps. And within him still stirred that restless whisper, "Go farther." He called his men together, stood on a high rock beneath damp gray skies, his eyes burning like when he first spoke in Pella. He declared, "I see a world without names, and if you follow me, we will inscribe ours upon it, with not blood, but presence." No one replied, only the sound of rain on bronze shields, and the earth's long silent sigh. An old soldier stepped forward, sun-scorched gray in beard. He didn't bow, nor defy. He simply stood like a stone, refusing the river's pull. He said, "We've marched with you from Granicus Issus Gaugamela, carried your name through glaciers, deserts, and mountains. But now we can go no farther, not from fear, but from reaching the edge of loyalty's endurance." Another added, "We wish to return, not to a home, but to ourselves." Alexander was not angry. He looked into each face, men who'd left parts of themselves in every campaign, so that what remained could still say no. He stepped down, shed his cloak, and sat among them in silence, in rain. After a while he spoke. "You have followed me to the edge of the world. Today you teach me something that only the strong know when to stop." That night, no tents were pitched, just a circle of men around a dying fire. Hephaestion murmured, "Perhaps this is your greatest victory, not conquering a city, but surrendering your own will." Alexander replied, "I did not lose. I just learned to hear a no that thundered like storm, but storm born of care." And so he ordered the retreat, not by old roads, but along a new river unnamed. He named it Anapeson, the unforcing one. And from that moment, Alexander began his journey home, not in glory, but with a heart that had learned that sometimes stopping is the highest form of moving forward. Not every journey leads to a new place. Some only bring you closer to yourself. Alexander returned to Babylon, the city of Marduk, where ziggurats touched the sky and hanging gardens bloomed like dreams embroidered into desert dust. No longer a conqueror, no longer an expanding king. He returned like a man who had gone too far and finally heard a voice from within. The people welcomed him with gold incense music. But Alexander only smiled faintly, his gaze drifting past them, searching for something missing. Ptolemy asked, "What are you looking for?" "Gold." a throne, or something else?" Alexander answered softly. "I'm not looking anymore. I just want to sit and see what's still in my hands." He began walking the hanging gardens, alone where drops of water from high terraces fell like the breath of heaven. He carried no weapons, no guards, only a worn leather journal filled with longing, not yet put into words. One night, Alexander stood before the statue of Marduk, did not pray, did not ask permission, only asked, "If you are a god, why did you let me go so far and return more empty than when I began?" The statue said nothing, but a wind passed by, and he shivered, not from cold, but from a nearness to understanding. Day by day he ordered no conquests, but built libraries, summoned stonemasons, opened schools for language. He did not draw borders, but erased them. A veteran whispered, "Our king has become the teacher no one asked for, but everyone needed." Hephaestion was gone, lost to fever in the desert. On Alexander's first night in Babylon, he had called out his friend's name in his sleep and woke gripping only air. He said, "I don't fear death. I fear dying before I understand why I lived." In Babylon, he no longer expanded, but instead shrank himself to hear the stories buried in every brick. A young student asked him, "Are you a god?" Alexander smiled, knelt. "No, I'm just a man who once wanted to be a god, then realized even gods are not as lonely as lost men." Babylon could not hold him long. His health declined. The fever came like a salt-stained dream from which he could not wake. On his final night, he murmured to a guard, "If they ask, say I left the empire to the one most worthy of loneliness." Then he closed his eyes. No more throne, no more sword, only a heart that had gone far enough to finally stay. Not every king leaves a crown. Some depart, leaving only a space wide enough for all to stare into and not know whether to fear or kneel. Alexander died without a written will. No heir named, no final speech. Only one phrase murmured in fever, "Give it to the most worthy." That line fell like an arrow without a mark. Each man heard it in his own direction. Ptolemy thought, "Surely he meant me." Seleucus whispered, "No, it's a signal to divide." Cassander tightened his blade, and Perdiccas stood silent, as if hearing the voice of a god from behind time. There was no coronation, no crown passed, only an empty throne and a world beginning to fracture. Babylon, once the center, now became a pit of doubt. Who would hold the East? Who would guard Egypt? Who would protect Macedonia? None had the answer. because the only one who could hold all of it chose to leave without holding on to anyone. They say Alexander had time to write a will, but burned it, realizing an empire born of will cannot be divided by words. And the one truly worthy needs no name to be called upon. In the chamber where he died, a guard found a small journal. No commands, no schedule, just questions. If I stop, will they still go on? Maybe a child will understand me more than general. If the gods await me, will they ask how many lands I claimed, or how many times I knew to turn back? He left no power. He left a burden no one dared to fully carry. The world split. Generals became kings. Provinces became nations. And the name Alexander, once a man became a legend, retold differently by every people. One night, Ptolemy stood by the window in Babylon, looked at the sky, and said, "You are gone, leaving nothing. Yet I feel you're still here in the silence that all thrones fear." Alexander left no will because his quiet departure was the greatest testament. Do not seek a successor. Become a world where all carry a piece of my dream. Death does not end a dream. Some dreams only begin to become real after their dreamer is gone, even if cracked and distorted. Alexander had departed, but each survivor became a path the shared dream chose to walk alone. Ptolemy left Babylon, bearing Alexander's body on a golden chariot beneath Egypt's burning sky. He did not seek kingship, but when he saw the Nile, he whispered, "I will build you a city where memory breathes and dreams can be buried without dying." Thus, Alexandria rose not as legacy, but as a living tomb where light still says Alexander's name at every dawn. Seleucus turned east, where red sands meet the Indus, where gods wear no human shape. He forged a new empire with a capital called Seleucia, though in his heart he always knew, though it bears my name, the dream I carry belongs to someone else. He tried to blend Greece with the East, but the more he tried, the more he saw. It wasn't Alexander who created peace, but his absence that forced others to finally sit together. Cassander, by contrast, turned west and began dismantling all Alexander had built in their homeland. He changed laws, named statues, but he could not change the shadow that followed, no matter how far he stepped. Roxana, Alexander's widow, cradled their young son, carrying the dream of survival. No throne, no army, only hope that the child would still speak his father's name someday. The world after Alexander was a shattered map, each shard a piece of a mirror that once reflected a single light. People said, "The day Alexander died, the stars went silent." But those who lived carried the dream in 4 directions, like fragments of a soul seeking its lost fire. And though no one could carry the dream whole, they still walked. Because something stronger than success is the refusal to abandon what one once believed. Note: every city needs a king. Some exist simply to show that humans can go on even after myths have stepped back into shadow. The generations after Alexander heard no more blades, saw no more horses. They heard his name through books on carved walls, in the lullabies, whispered through winter wind, telling of a man who passed like flame across the earth. And then they began building cities without thrones, not to forget, but to continue without carrying old wounds as relics. In Egypt, Alexandria was no longer just a capital. It became a haven for scholars from all directions to read, write, argue, and ask, does glory always require war to be born? In the East, cities within the Seleucid realm spoke two tongues, held two beliefs, named the same star in two ways, but no one forced the other to choose. They learned to live together, not because Alexander commanded, but because he once dreamed. Children named Iskander grew up not knowing exactly who Iskander was, only that the name stood for something once bright. These new cities held no statues of Alexander in their main squares, but on walls, blue eyes, and a shadow of a horse were painted with small words beneath. He once passed here. We did not keep him, only learned how to let the wind remember. A traveling poet wrote in his journal, I have passed through Alexandria, Bactra, Ecbatana. I saw no empire, only people still speaking his name, like the sea whispering back the sound of a storm long gone. And so the cities after Alexander did not need empire, but needed a reason to believe that someone once reached something great and did not keep it for himself. Among broken columns on the stone floor, where once a throne stood, a child scribbled into dust, when I grow up, I do not want to be a king. I want to walk like he did, not to be remembered, but to remind others that someone once believed in things larger than himself. Some, when they die, become earth. Others become roads. But a rare few, when they pass, become stars. After Alexander left this world, it never returned to what it was. Not because an empire was gone, but because a question remained unanswered. How far can a man go before he disappears into his own legend? They say on his final night in Babylon, a light fell from the sky, not bright, not loud, but quiet, like the period ending a magnificent sentence. Centuries passed. People kept looking skyward, seeking a star brighter than the rest, and called it the Wanderer. No one proved it was Alexander, but no one denied if anyone deserves to walk among stars, it is the one who dared to dream beyond all borders. Across lands he once rode through, people built temples and forgot them, wrote books and lost them. But what endured was the idea we can go beyond ourselves. A child in a nameless city one night looked skyward and asked his father, "What's that star called?" The father answered, "Alexander, not because it is a star, but because when you see it, you know someone once crossed the darkness and did not leave fear behind. And so, through time, Alexander ceased to be man or king or myth and became a point of light among humanity's endless questions. Can we live in a way that leaves something greater than ourselves? In the sky, there is a star bearing no name of Greece, no mark of Persia, only a gaze of one who once stood between worlds and asked, "How much farther can I go?" And when you look at that star, perhaps you hear nothing. But if you're still, very still, you will feel the dream is still moving.